Hello everyone! Today we're going to talk about Young Frankenstein. This 1974 film was directed by Mel Brooks, who co-wrote the screenplay with star Gene Wilder. Wilder plays Dr. Frederick Frankenstein.
That's Frankenstein.
Frankenstein is the grandson of Baron Victor von Frankenstein, who did all those notorious experiments on the reanimation of dead tissue. Frederick Frankenstein rebuffs any attempt to associate him with his grandfather's work, but when the old man dies and Frederick travels to the family castle in Transylvania, he finds the old lab and the journal, conveniently titled How I Did It, and despite prior protestations and efforts to escape his destiny, he realizes
It can't work!
He immediately sets about making his own creature, determined that this time he's gonna get it right. But this is a comedy, so of course things are going to go wrong in the most absurd ways. A few years ago, I reviewed the Frankenstein films made by Universal in the 30s and 40s. One video covered the first four movies, Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Son of Frankenstein, and The Ghost of Frankenstein, all of which just feature the monster, and the other video covered what I call the Monster Mash films, Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, House of Frankenstein, and House of Dracula, with Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein thrown in as a bonus. At the time, I knew that although it came out a few decades later, Young Frankenstein goes hand in hand with those films. Therefore, reviewing that would be the next logical step. I didn't take that step because it's a comedy, and I find those tricky to review. But I changed my mind. Now, this is a Mel Brooks film, and as I've gotten older, I've learned that I find his stuff very hit or miss. In general, I'm not into feature-length parodies, and his jokes don't always land with me. But for the most part, the humor in this movie remains fresh, and these actors were so skilled in the art of effortlessly delivering outrageous dialogue that they were able to sell it as more than just another parody. I will say this, though. Some of the jokes are much more sexual than I remembered. I hadn't seen this movie in probably 15 years, and I was surprised how much innuendo I'd forgotten about. I did see it as a kid, saw it several times as a kid. I did catch on to a lot of the innuendo, but I don't think I realized just how much of it there was, or the full extent of what they were implying. So, I know some of you would appreciate me giving you a little content advisory there. Young Frankenstein boasts perfect casting, a collection of performers ideally suited to their quirky characters. There was nobody quite like Gene Wilder. His comic timing and delivery are unique, characterized by a swing from apparent calm to explosive madness. He mastered the meaningful pause and the curious hesitation in response to a bizarre comment. His character here is surrounded by people who may be a little deranged, but he's a little deranged himself.
I don't want to live! I do not want to live!
Quiet dignity and grace.
But like other great comic actors, Wilder could also convey tremendous pathos. He had an innocence in his expression that could endear him to the audience despite their misgivings about his character's sanity or trustworthiness. And though he became famous playing eccentrics who occasionally blew their tops,
Sedative?
he often brought an underlying sweetness or melancholy to his roles. And as I found when I reviewed all those Universal films, that complexity of the demented, tortured, mad genius anti-hero is as essential to the story as the monster itself. If there's anyone who's going to steal the spotlight from Wilder, though, it's going to be Marty Feldman as Igor, considered by both Brooks and Wilder to be the true heart of the film.
You must be Igor.
No, it's pronounced Igor.
But they told me it was Igor.
Well, they were wrong then, weren't they?
Igor gets all the best bits.
Their wolf. Their castle.
Why are you talking that way?
I thought you wanted to.
No, I don't want to.
Suit yourself. I'm easy.
I especially enjoy his interactions with Frederick.
Igor! Frederick!
Could be worse.
How?
Could be raining.
The dynamic between them is so topsy-turvy. They're both kind of crazy in their own separate ways. And though Igor, as Igors always do, has the appropriate, subservient, yes, master, attitude, Frederick is really at his mercy.
Abby someone. Abby someone. Abby who? Abby normal.
Madeline Kahn is a hoot as usual as Frederick's sort of uptight, super-rich socialite soon-to-be wife Elizabeth.
How do you do? How do you do?
This is my financier, Elizabeth.
Oh, I'm so happy to meet you at last.
Finance.
Terry Garr plays Inga, the charming ditzy local who's inexplicably assigned to him as a lab assistant.
Excuse me, darling. What is it exactly that you do?
Elizabeth was considered the more coveted role, but Inga actually has more screen time. She doesn't get to don the bride's wig, but she does get to wear an array of outfits, and interestingly, Gar's mother Phyllis, a Hollywood wardrobe mistress, was responsible for the ladies' costumes in the film. Cloris Leachman gives an unforgettable performance as the not-so-severe-as-she-seems housekeeper.
I am Frau Blucher.
Kenneth Mars plays Inspector Kemp, spoofing Lionel Atwill's character in Son of Frankenstein with a tricky mechanical arm and a thick accent that even the locals have trouble deciphering.
That young Frankenstein is indeed following in his grandfather's footsteps. What? Following in his grandfather's footsteps. Peter
Boyle assumes the role of the bulky 7.5-foot-tall creature, and I think it's interesting how they took elements of the Boris Karloff interpretation with Jack Pierce's makeup and tweaked it some to make it distinct. Boyle has more opportunities to emote and even gets to break the fourth wall, and ultimately he gets to do something that Karloff's monster, to Karloff's frustration, never got to do, speak with astounding eloquence and wisdom. Young Frankenstein takes a page from the original novel there, though it comes about differently. Incidentally, there are a couple instances where the script paraphrases Mary Shelley's text, and I find that pretty impressive for a film that wasn't even trying to be a serious adaptation. At Gene Wilder's request, Mel Brooks does not appear in his own film, as he was wont to do, but there is a scene where he supplies the voice of Victor Frankenstein. I only know that because I looked it up. He also voiced the werewolf and improvised the howl of a cat hit by a stray dart. The most unexpected addition is Gene Hackman, who makes a surprise appearance as the blind hermit. Hackman was a big star by then, having just won the Best Actor Oscar for The French Connection. While playing tennis with Gene Wilder, with whom he appeared in '67's Bonnie and Clyde, he asked if he could be in this movie and was given this part, for which he took no pay. The rare comedic turn was a great success. He ad-libbed his last line.
I was gonna make espresso.
Everyone burst out laughing, so the scene ends there pretty abruptly. They couldn't get additional takes because Hackman couldn't stop laughing. And that's pretty much how this movie got made, with lines, gags, and reactions being improvised right and left. Although Wilder and Brooks did sometimes butt heads over creative differences, and they had some really big fights, undoubtedly, it sounds like everyone had fun on set. Crack-ups were regular occurrences, Wilder in particular having a hard time maintaining a straight face, which isn't necessarily a bad problem to have when you're trying to make a funny movie. This scene took forever to shoot because Feldman kept getting a piece of Kahn's fur stole stuck in his teeth, and then everyone would lose it.
You take the blonde and I'll take the one in the Taven.
Stop that. I'm talking about the luggage.
All that said, I'm not sure that it's accurate to call Young Frankenstein an outright parody. I know that was Wilder's and Brooks' intent, but it could easily have had a more snarky, derisive tone, making jabs at plot holes and visual effects and other things in the old movies. Yet, given how much time was spent on details and making everything look just right, I don't think its sole purpose was to lampoon them. Maybe I'm biased because I for one like those old movies, even the hokey ones, but to me, this feels more like a love letter to classic horror films, a smooth blend of parody and tribute. Young Frankenstein has become iconic in its own right, and you don't need to have seen the other movies to enjoy it. I hadn't when I saw it as a kid. But if you are familiar with 1931's Frankenstein, 1935's Bride of Frankenstein, and 1939's Son of Frankenstein, well, there are dozens of references that you'll be able to appreciate. The narrative is a composite of elements lifted from these films. From Frankenstein comes the making of the monster, the assistant who obtains the wrong brain, the little girl with the flowers, the fiancé who catches the monster's eye. From Bride comes, obviously, the bride's hairstyle and the scene with the blind hermit. And from Son comes the descendant taking up his ancestor's work, the suspicious inspector with the prosthetic arm, and the deformed assistant named Igor. Igor's mannerisms and mishaps and hump
What hump?
are actually inspired more by the two peculiar assistants Fritz and Karl, both played by Dwight Fry in the first two films, but the name Igor was taken from the sinister character played by Bela Lugosi in Son of Frankenstein and The Ghost of Frankenstein. Likewise, the castle set design reflects the old scenery. The lab, the rooftop, and that tortuous staircase resemble the Frankenstein and Bride sets, and the great room with the chandelier and the huge fireplace, as well as the secret passageway, remind me of Son of Frankenstein. I contemplated the possibility that Frederick could be the little boy from the third movie. If this is set in 74, that would put him around 40 years old, so it checks out. But that boy's name was Peter, not Frederick, or Friedrich, and he says nothing about his father's experiments or the no doubt traumatizing events of that film. So it takes elements from the two sequels, or the three sequels, but it's not a sequel itself, except to sort of the first movie. Besides, I'm really not sure when this movie's supposed to take place. There are 70s hairstyles here, but based on the way the ladies in this scene are dressed and the way Madeline Kahn's talking, this could be the 30s, and then the people in Transylvania, who knows what time period they're stuck in. Mary Shelley's novel, as far as I can remember, doesn't even set foot in Transylvania. Transylvania is Dracula country. Frankenstein is in Switzerland, and then spends the bulk of the time in Germany, and then ends in the North Pole. But the old movies liked to revolve around this fictional village called Vassaria, and that's what Young Frankenstein is parodying, this kind of German or Scandinavian place where everybody's wearing alpine hats and lederhosen, and it's very quaint, and everybody's just chomping at the bit to grab for their torches and pitchforks. And while we're pointing out differences, Colin Clive's Dr. Frankenstein was named Henry. The Dr. Frankenstein of the original novel was named Victor, and that's the name used for the Baron here. So that was actually a correction. A great twist in real life helped give the film an extra dash of authenticity. Mel Brooks found out that Ken Strickfaden, designer of the lab equipment used in the original 31 and 35 films, still had it sitting in his garage. Strickfaden, or maybe it's Strickfaden, had done electrical and prop work and had also served as Karloff's stunt double in one dangerous sequence. But as was the case with most of the crew and even some cast members on old movies, he was uncredited. He allowed Brooks to rent the equipment and helped get it working again to bring Frankenstein's laboratory back to life just as it had been before. In return, Brooks gratefully acknowledged his contribution with a special credit. And that's why you should never throw anything away. The thing that I feel makes Young Frankenstein special is that you go into it expecting a screwball comedy, and you get that, but you also get a surprisingly good Frankenstein story and an appealing work of art. It's not devoid of the atmosphere that befits a horror movie, clichés, some might call them, and it stays true to those roots, pumping in fog, adorning sets with cobwebs, punctuating dramatic moments with thunder and lightning. Granted, there's only one moment in the film that ever really scared me, and that's the very first scene where someone opens the Baron's coffin to reveal his corpse, already in an advanced stage of decomposition. I did find out that I've been remembering this scene wrong for years. I was positive that the coffin opens on its own, and you see a skeleton lying there, and then all of a sudden it lunges at the camera. I so clearly remember this. It terrified me as a kid. I liked the movie. We watched it several times. My sister and I quoted some lines from it a lot. But I never wanted to see that scene again, so every time we rewatched it, I looked away because I didn't want to be that scared. I guess that led to me just completely reimagining how it plays out. So that's kind of embarrassing. It occurs to me now that this beginning is kind of a red herring. It suggests a ghoulish gruesomeness that doesn't really pervade the rest of the movie, at least not explicitly. But the macabre nature of the subject matter is frequently alluded to, albeit in a comical way. I think director of photography Gerald Hirschfield's black and white cinematography is delicious, and it gives the film this vintage timelessness, which I suppose is an oxymoron. I cannot imagine it in color, so I'm glad Brooks fought tooth and nail with the studios, first Columbia, then 20th Century Fox, to get his way. Color would just be wrong, and the black and white makes it a natural fit alongside those 30s films, especially Bride of Frankenstein, which boasts some of the most remarkable cinematography of that decade. It's easy to focus so much on the jokes that you miss the fact that this version of the Frankenstein tale does retain all the same elements of tragedy. The out-of-place creature hated by the world and rejected by his creator, the scientist gone mad with obsession, the bittersweetness of the hermit scene, even if it is played for laughs, where two lonely souls find each other but fail to connect. In the final act, the story goes in a new direction when Frederick changes his tactic.
Hello, handsome!
Having come to terms with what he's made and realized that this monster is as hungry for affection and acceptance and praise as any other human being, he sets out to prove it to the world. Of course, what better way to show off this so-called single greatest contribution to science than with a song and dance routine?
If you're blue and you don't know where to go to, why don't you go where fashion sits?
This whole crazy thing was Wilder's idea, although Boyle came up with that delivery of putting on the Ritz on the spot. Amazingly, Brooks was not sold on this whole sequence until he saw how much the screening audience loved it, and now it's gone on to become probably the most famous scene. A running theme in the film is that whenever they need to calm the creature or lure him back home, one of them plays this song on the violin. I bet some people think that such a silly movie has no right to have such achingly beautiful music composed by John Morris. That violin melody has turned out to be one of the things I think of most whenever this movie comes up. To me, the music of Young Frankenstein is one of the film's most important features, because this haunting theme perfectly gives voice to the inarticulate monster's wistful yearning to belong, and also to Frankenstein's suppressed curiosity and eventual mania. I think we can all relate to one of those things on some level, so at the end of the day, this movie can make us laugh, but it also has the ability to make us feel a deeper emotion, and I think that's why it continues to be so beloved. There's a lot more that could be said, I'm sure, but I'm going to end it here. I hope you enjoyed this video. What do you think of Young Frankenstein? Go ahead and share your thoughts on it in the comments below, and thanks for watching.